It was a cold, stormy night. The rain poured heavily, and thunder roared like an angry beast in the sky. The streets were almost empty, with only the sound of water splashing against the ground and the occasional crack of lightning lighting up the dark sky. But at the entrance of St. Mary's Hospital, something strange was happening. A dog was barking. Not just any bark. It was loud, desperate, and unrelenting. The dog's name was Max, and he was soaked to the bone, his brown fur plastered to his thin frame. He was pacing back and forth, barking at the hospital doors as if trying to speak to the people inside. Every now and then, he'd look back toward the street, as though urging someone to follow him. "Whose dog is this?" One of the hospital security guards, Chijioke, grumbled as he stood under the awning to avoid the rain. He waved his hand at Max's shoe. "Get out of here." But Max didn't move. He barked louder, his sharp cries cutting through the stormy night. "Leave the poor thing alone," said Nurse Beezy, who had just stepped outside for a quick break. She was holding a steaming cup of tea, her scrubs slightly damp from the rain. "Can't you see he's trying to tell us something?" Chijioke snorted. "It's just a dog, Beezy. Probably hungry. Or maybe it's looking for its owner. But look at him," Beezy insisted, her voice softening as she bent down to take a closer look at Mac. "He's not just barking for fun. He's trying to get our attention." Dr. Cunnell, who was passing by, overheard the conversation. He paused, his hands shoved into the pockets of his white coat. He was a tall man with sharp features and an air of quiet confidence. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone calm but curious. "It's this dog, Doctor," Beezy explained, gesturing at Max. "He's been here barking non-stop. I think something's wrong." Cunnell raised an eyebrow. "A barking dog? That's what's stopping you from getting back to work?" "It's not just barking," Beezy argued. "He's acting different, like he needs our help." Cunnell sighed and stepped closer to Max, who immediately turned to look at him. The dog's wide, pleading eyes seemed to say, "Please, follow me." For a moment, Cunnell felt a strange pang of guilt. He had always been the logical type, the kind of person who needed hard evidence before believing anything. But there was something about this dog that made him pause. "Fine," Cunnell said, more to himself than anyone else. "Let's see what this is about." "You're actually going to follow a dog?" Chijioke asked, his tone filled with disbelief. Cunnell shrugged. "If it gets him to stop barking, why not?" Beezy's face lit up with relief. "I'll come with you," she said, setting her tea down. "I have a feeling this is important." Cunnell grabbed a flashlight from the security desk, and the three of them, Cunnell, Beezy, and a reluctant Chijioke, stepped into the pouring rain. Max immediately darted off, stopping every few seconds to make sure they were following him. The streets were dark, with only the occasional flicker of a street lamp to guide their way. The rain made everything slippery, and Beezy had to hold onto Cunnell's arm to keep from slipping. "This better not be a waste of time," Chijioke muttered as they trudged along. "I could be inside, warm and dry." "Just keep up," Cunnell said, his eyes focused on Max. The dog was moving quickly, but he never went too far ahead, always turning back to bark and make sure they were still following. After what felt like an eternity, Max led them to a small, modest house at the end of a quiet street. The light from a single window flickered faintly, but everything else was still. "This is it?" Cunnell asked, shining his flashlight on the house. Max barked twice and ran to the front door, scratching at it frantically. "Do you think someone's inside?" Beezy whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "There's only one way to find out," Cunnell replied. He stepped onto the porch and knocked on the door. "Hello? Is anyone home?" he called out. There was no response. "Maybe they're asleep," Chijioke suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. Cunnell knocked again, harder this time. "If anyone's in there, please open the door. We're here to help." Still nothing. Max barked again, louder and more desperate than before. He scratched at the door with such force that his claws left marks on the wood. Cunnell exchanged a look with Beezy. "I'm breaking the door down," he said firmly. "If someone's hurt in there, we don't have time to wait." Chijioke groaned. "This is going to come out of your paycheck, not mine." Connell ignored him and positioned himself in front of the door. With one strong kick, the door burst open, revealing a dimly lit living room. The smell of damp air and something faintly metallic filled their noses. "Hello," Beezy called out as they stepped inside. That's when they saw her. A woman lay sprawled on the floor, her face pale and her breath shallow. She looked lifeless, her body limp and her eyes closed. Max ran to her side, whining softly as he nudged her with his nose. "Oh my God," Beezy gasped, rushing forward. "She's barely breathing." Connell was already by her side, checking her pulse. "She's alive, but just barely. We need to get her to the hospital now." "Who is she?" Chijioke asked, though it was clear no one had an answer. "Does it matter?" Connell snapped. "Help me lift her." With Chijioke's reluctant help, they carried the woman out into the rain. Max followed closely, his tail wagging slightly as if he knew they were saving her. The ride back to the hospital was tense. Beezy kept glancing back at the unconscious woman, her heart pounding with worry. "Do you think she'll be okay?" she asked Connell. "She'll be fine," Connell said, though his voice lacked certainty. "We just need to act fast." When they arrived at the hospital, a team of nurses and doctors sprang into action, wheeling the woman into the emergency room. Max tried to follow, but Chijioke held him back. "You've done enough, boy," he said gruffly, though there was a hint of admiration in his voice. Max sat by the entrance, his eyes fixed on the doors as they swung shut behind the gurney. For the first time that night, he was silent. That was the beginning of a night no one at St. Mary's Hospital would ever forget. The dog who wouldn't stop barking had led them to something far bigger than any of them could have imagined. And as they worked tirelessly to save the mysterious woman, one question lingered in the back of everyone's mind. Who was she, and why had her dog gone to such great lengths to save her? The hospital was quiet now, except for the occasional footsteps of nurses and the faint beeping of machines. Kemi lay on a hospital bed, pale and still, with an oxygen mask over her face. Outside the room, Max sat in the waiting area, his ears perked up every time someone walked by. He wouldn't move, not even when the security guard tried to shoo him away. It was as if he knew his job wasn't done yet. Nurse Beezy walked over to Dr. Connell, who was reading Kemi's chart outside her room. "How is she?" she asked quietly, peeking through the window at the unconscious woman. Connell sighed, rubbing his forehead. "She's stable for now, but it was close. If we hadn't found her when we did." His voice trailed off, but the unspoken words were clear. "She would have died," Beezy said softly, finishing his sentence. Connell nodded. "Yes, it's lucky that dog brought us to her." Beezy glanced toward Max, who was now lying on the cold floor, his eyes fixed on the door to Kemi's room. "He's not just lucky," she said. "He's amazing. He knew something was wrong. How many dogs would do that?" Connell didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at Max, his thoughts turning over in his mind. Finally, he said, "It makes you wonder how strong their bond must be." The next morning, the rain had stopped, and sunlight streamed through the hospital windows. Kemi still hadn't woken up, but her condition had improved. Nurse Beezy sat by her bedside, holding her hand. "You must be a fighter," Beezy said softly, as if speaking to herself. "To hold on like this, with no one around to help you but your dog. You're stronger than you look." Max's ears perked up outside the room, and he gave a low whine, as if he could feel Beezy's words. Passing doctor stopped to look at the dog. "Is he still here?" he asked in surprise. "Yes," Beezy replied, smiling faintly. "He won't leave her." The doctor shook his head. "That's loyalty for you." Connell joined them a few minutes later, carrying a cup of coffee. He took a sip and leaned against the wall. "Any change?" he asked. Beezy shook her head. "Not yet, but her vitals are strong. I think she's fighting to come back." Connell glanced at Kemi, his expression thoughtful. "I wonder what her story is," he said. "A young woman living all alone. No family around, just her dog." Beezy hesitated before asking, Do you think anyone will come looking for her? Friends? Relatives? Connell shrugged. We'll try to find out. But for now, we just have to wait. The story of Kemi and Max began years ago, in a quiet neighborhood in Lagos. Back then, Kemi had been a bright, cheerful young woman with big dreams. She had grown up in a loving family, with parents who adored her and siblings who teased her endlessly but loved her fiercely. But all of that changed one terrible day. Kemi's family had been on their way to a wedding when their car skidded off the road during a heavy rainstorm. The crash claimed the lives of her parents and siblings, leaving Kemi as the only survivor. After the accident, Kemi's world became small and quiet. She moved into a modest house in a different neighborhood, far away from the memories of her old life. She threw herself into her work as a primary school teacher, finding solace in her students' laughter. But when the school day ended, she returned to an empty house, with no one to greet her and no one to talk to. That was when Max entered her life. It was a hot afternoon, and Kemi had just finished her weekly visit to the market. She was walking home with a basket of groceries when she heard a faint whimper coming from an alley. She stopped and looked around, but the narrow street seemed empty. "Hello," she called out, feeling a little silly for talking to no one. Then she heard it again, a soft, pitiful whine. Kemi followed the sound and found a small, scruffy puppy huddled under an old crate. His fur was matted with dirt, and he looked so thin that she could see his ribs. "Oh no," Kemi murmured, crouching down. "What happened to you?" The puppy looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes but didn't move. He was too weak to run. Kemi's heart ached for the tiny creature. Without thinking, she set her basket down and gently scooped him up. "You're coming with me," she said firmly, cradling the puppy in her arms. "I can't leave you here." When she got home, Kemi cleaned the puppy, fed him, and made a little bed for him out of an old blanket. She named him Max, after a character in one of her favorite childhood books. From that day on, Max became her closest companion. As the months turned into years, Kemi and Max became inseparable. He was there for her on the lonely nights when memories of her family felt too heavy to bear. He greeted her every evening when she came home from school, his tail wagging so hard it seemed like it might fall off. And in return, Kemi gave Max all the love she had left to give. But no one knew how much Kemi relied on Max. Not even her students. She kept her private life just that, private. To the outside world, she was the friendly, hardworking teacher who always had a kind word and a warm smile. But inside, she was a woman carrying a heavy burden, too afraid to let anyone else in. Back in the hospital, Kemi stirred slightly in her bed. Her fingers twitched, and her breathing grew steadier. Nurse Beezy, who had been sitting nearby, leaned forward eagerly. "Dr. Connell," she called out. "I think she's waking up." Connell hurried into the room, followed by a curious Max, who refused to stay put when he heard the commotion. He stood at the door, wagging his tail and whining softly. Kemi's eyes fluttered open, and she blinked against the bright hospital lights. For a moment, she looked confused, her gaze darting around the room. "You're safe," Connell said gently, stepping into her line of sight. "You're in the hospital. Can you hear me?" Kemi nodded weakly. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she asked, "What happened?" "You were unconscious," Beezy explained. "We found you at your house. Your dog led us there." At the mention of Max, Kemi's eyes filled with tears. She turned her head toward the door and saw him standing there, his tail wagging furiously now that she was awake. "Max," she whispered, her voice breaking. Connell motioned for the dog to come in. Max bounded over to Kemi's bedside, placing his front paws gently on the edge of the bed. He licked her hand, whining as if to say, "I'm here. You're okay now." Kemi reached out and stroked his head, her fingers trembling. "You saved me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You really saved me." Beezy wiped away a tear and smiled. "He's not just a dog," she said softly. "He's your hero." For the first time in what felt like forever, Kemi didn't feel alone. Max had been her lifeline, and now, because of him, she had a second chance. But as she lay there, holding on to Max and letting the tears fall, she couldn't help but wonder, how much longer could she keep living this way? Alone, afraid, and carrying so much pain? The answers would come, but for now, Kemi let herself rest, surrounded by the warmth of her loyal friend and the kindness of strangers who had followed a barking dog into the rain. Kemi lay back against the soft pillows, her breathing steady but shallow. The oxygen mask was gone now, and she was finally able to speak in quiet, broken sentences. Max sat on the floor beside her bed, his head resting on his paws. Every so often, he would look up at her, his wide brown eyes filled with an unspoken question. "Are you okay?" Nurse Beezy sat at the edge of the bed, holding Kemi's hand like she was an old friend. "You gave us quite the scare," Beezy said, her voice warm but firm. "If Max hadn't come to the hospital, we might not have found you in time." Kemi turned her head slowly toward Beezy, her eyes glassy with tears. He did all that?" Her voice cracked, as if she could hardly believe it. Beezy nodded. "Yes, he came barking like his life depended on it. None of us understood at first, but he didn't give up. He led us straight to you." Kemi let out a shaky breath and reached down to pat Max's head. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're my hero, Mac." Max's tail thumped lightly against the floor, but he didn't move. It was as though he knew Kemi still needed him close, and he wasn't going anywhere. Later that morning, Dr. Cunnell walked into the room, holding a clipboard. His usual stern expression softened when he saw Kemi awake. "Good to see you up," he said with a small smile. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," Kemi admitted. Her voice was still weak, but there was a flicker of gratitude in her tone. "Thank you for helping me." Cunnell waved it off. "Thank your dog," he said. Glancing at Max, "He did most of the work. I just showed up." Kemi gave a faint smile, but it quickly faded. "I don't even know how it got this bad," she said, her voice tinged with guilt. "I've always been careful about my health. I didn't think it would come to this." Cunnell pulled up a chair and sat beside her bed. "That's the thing about living alone," he said matter-of-factly. "You don't always have someone around to notice when something's wrong." Kemi looked down at her hands. She didn't say anything, but her silence spoke volumes. Cunnell sighed, leaning forward slightly. "Do you have anyone we can call?" he asked gently. "Family? Friends? Someone who can stay with you while you recover?" Kemi shook her head slowly. "No one," she said quietly. "It's just me and Mac." The room fell silent, except for the faint hum of the machines monitoring Kemi's vitals. Beezy, who had been tidying up the room, stopped what she was doing and turned to face Kemi. "You don't have anyone at all?" Beezy asked, her voice soft but full of concern. "No siblings? No close friends?" Kemi hesitated before answering. "I used to," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But after my parents and siblings died, I guess I just pulled away from everyone. It was easier that way." Cunnell exchanged a glance with Beezy, who looked like she wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. Finally, Cunnell spoke. "I get that," he said, his voice steady. "Sometimes it feels easier to be alone. No one can hurt you if you don't let them get close, right?" Kemi looked at him, surprised. "Exactly," she said, her voice trembling. "But then, it's just so lonely." Cunnell nodded, leaning back in his chair. "Loneliness can creep up on you," he said. "And before you know it, it's like a weight you can't shake off. But pushing people away doesn't make it go away. Trust me, I know." For a moment, Kemi didn't know what to say. Cunnell's words felt too real, too close to the truth she had been avoiding for years. She looked over at Max, who was still lying quietly by her side. "He's the only one who's ever stayed," she said softly. Max has been with me through everything. Beezy sat down on the other side of the bed, her voice gentle but firm. And he'll always be there, she said. But you don't have to go through life with just him. You're stronger than you think, Kemi. And it's okay to let people in. Just then, a knock at the door broke the moment. A nurse peeked in, holding a small stack of papers. Dr. Cunnell, someone from the press is here, she said hesitantly. They heard about the dog, and they want to write a story about it. Cunnell frowned. The press? He repeated, his tone sharp. What for? The nurse shrugged. Apparently, someone from the hospital told them about how the dog led us to Miss Kemi. They think it's a big deal. Cunnell glanced at Kemi, whose eyes widened slightly. I don't know if that's a good idea, she said quickly. I'm not comfortable with all of that attention. Before Cunnell could respond, Beezy stepped in. I think it's sweet, she said, smiling. Max deserves to be recognized for what he did. He's a hero. Kemi looked uncertain. But what if they ask questions about me? About my life? You don't have to tell them anything you don't want to, Cunnell assured her. This is about Max. If you're not comfortable, we can tell them no. Max, sensing the tension, let out a soft bark and nudged Kemi's hand with his nose. She smiled despite herself and scratched behind his ears. I guess he does deserve it, she said finally. As long as they keep the focus on him. A few hours later, a journalist arrived with a camera crew. The hospital staff gathered in the waiting area, excited to see what was happening. Max sat proudly beside Kemi, his tail wagging as the crew set up their equipment. Is this the hero dog? The journalist asked, crouching down to Max's level. You're the star of the show, aren't you, boy? Max barked happily, and the room filled with laughter. Even Kemi couldn't help but smile, though her hands trembled slightly as she held onto Max's leash. The journalist turned to Kemi. You must be so proud of him, she said warmly. Can you tell us what it's like having a dog like Max? Kemi hesitated, glancing at Cunnell and Beezy, who nodded encouragingly. He's my best friend, she said slowly. He's always been there for me, no matter what. And now, he saved my life. The journalist beamed. That's such a beautiful story. Max is a true hero. As the interview went on, more hospital staff and patients gathered to watch. Everyone wanted to see the dog who had saved his owner. By the time the crew packed up and left, Max was officially a local celebrity. Kemi leaned back in her chair, exhausted but happy. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't invisible. People saw her now, not just as a lonely woman, but as someone with a story worth telling. Cunnell sat down beside her, a small smile playing on his lips. See, he said, letting people in isn't so bad. Kemi laughed softly, shaking her head. It's not as easy as you make it sound. No, it's not, Cunnell agreed. But it's worth it. As Kemi looked around at the smiling faces of the hospital staff, she realized Cunnell might be right. And as Max rested his head on her lap, she felt a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in years. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. The next day, the hospital was buzzing with chatter about Max and Kemi. Staff and patients alike couldn't stop talking about the dog that had saved his owner's life. Everywhere Kemi went, people smiled at her and waved. It was strange, this sudden attention. She wasn't used to it. For years, she had worked so hard to stay unnoticed, to blend into the background. Now everyone seemed to know her name. Max, on the other hand, seemed to love the spotlight. He wagged his tail every time someone called him a hero, and he soaked up all the pats and treats people offered him. Watching him, Kemi couldn't help but laugh. You're such a show-off, she said, scratching behind his ears. He's earned it, Nurse Beezy said, stepping into the room with a warm smile. How are you feeling today? Kemi shrugged. Better, I guess. A little tired. That's normal, Beezy said, sitting down beside her. You've been through a lot. It's okay to take your time. Kemi looked down at her hands. I don't know how to feel about all this attention. I'm not used to people noticing me. Beezy tilted her head, her voice gentle. Why do you think that is? Kemi hesitated, then said softly, I guess I've spent so much time trying to keep to myself. After my family died, it felt easier to just disappear. Beezy nodded, not pushing her. That must have been really hard. It was, Kemi admitted, her voice trembling. I thought I was doing okay. I mean, I have Max, and I love my job. But now I'm realizing, maybe I'm not okay. Maybe I've been pretending for too long. Later that afternoon, Dr. Cunnell stopped by Kemi's room. He carried a small notebook and pen, and his usual serious expression was softened by something that almost looked like curiosity. You're getting a lot of visitors, he said, glancing at Max, who was stretched out on the floor. Your dog's become quite the celebrity. Kemi smiled faintly. He deserves it. He's the only reason I'm still here. Cunnell pulled up a chair. You know, he said, flipping open the notebook, I've been thinking a lot about people like you. People who live alone, who don't have anyone to check on them when something goes wrong. Kemi frowned slightly. What do you mean, people like me? I mean people who've fallen through the cracks, Cunnell explained. You're not the only one. There are so many people out there who are isolated, who don't have family or close friends. It's something we see all the time in hospitals. Patients who come in alone with no one to call. Kemi looked down at Max, her fingers brushing over his fur. I never thought of it like that. I guess I just assumed this was normal. Cunnell shook his head. It's not. And it's not your fault either. But it's something we need to talk about. As they talked, Beezy joined them, carrying a folder filled with papers. I was telling Dr. Cunnell earlier, she said, that we should start some kind of program to help people like you. Something to make sure no one has to go through what you did. Kemi blinked, startled. A program? What kind of program? Cunnell leaned forward, his voice serious but kind. We're thinking about creating a community outreach program. Something that connects people who are living in isolation with resources and support. We could organize regular check-ins, provide health screenings, even set up a network of volunteers to help with things like groceries or doctor visits. And we'd name it after Max, Beezy added with a smile. Max's mission. Kemi's eyes widened. You'd name it after Max? Why not? Cunnell said. He's the reason we're even having this conversation. If he hadn't come to the hospital, we wouldn't have found you in time. He's a hero, and his story could inspire a lot of people. Kemi felt a lump rise in her throat. She looked down at Max, who was now wagging his tail like he understood every word. I don't know, she said hesitantly. I mean, it's a wonderful idea, but I don't think I'm the right person to be part of something like that. Why not? Beezy asked gently. I'm just not used to this kind of attention, Kemi admitted. I've spent so much time hiding away. I wouldn't even know where to start. Cunnell gave her a thoughtful look. You don't have to do anything big, he said. Just sharing your story is enough. Let people see that it's okay to ask for help. That they're not alone. The conversation stayed with Kemi long after Cunnell and Beezy left the room. She couldn't stop thinking about their words, about the idea of Max's mission. It scared her, the thought of putting herself out there, of letting people into the private world she had built so carefully. But it also made her wonder, could she really make a difference? Could she turn her pain into something good? That evening, as the hospital quieted down, Kemi sat by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Max rested at her feet, his steady breathing a comforting presence. She reached down to stroke his fur, her thoughts swirling. I don't know if I can do it, Max, she whispered. What if I mess up? What if I'm not strong enough? Max looked up at her, his eyes calm and steady. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was enough. He had been her rock through everything, and now, more than ever, she felt like he was telling her, you can do this. You're not alone. For the first time in a long time, Kemi allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to move forward, not just for herself, but for others who needed to hear her story. The next morning, the sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, waking Kemi. For the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of energy. She sat up slowly, her movements still careful. Max immediately perked up from his spot near the bed, wagging his tail as if to say, "Good morning." "Good boy," Kemi said softly, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. She smiled at him, though her mind was still tangled with the thoughts from the day before. The idea of Max's mission both excited and scared her. Could she really be part of something so big? Later that morning, Nurse Beezy walked into the room, holding a small tray with breakfast. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. "How's my favorite patient today?" "Better, I think," Kemi replied, giving a small smile. She glanced down at Max, who wagged his tail at Beezy. "He's been keeping me company." "I'm not surprised," Beezy said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "That dog of yours is something special." She sat down on the edge of the bed and studied Kemi for a moment. "You've been thinking about it, haven't you?" "Thinking about what?" Kemi asked, though she already knew. "Max's mission," Beezy said, her tone gentle but direct. "I can see it in your face. You're not sure if you can do it." Kemi sighed and looked out the window. "It's just a lot," she admitted. "I've spent so many years keeping to myself. The idea of sharing my story, of being part of something so public, it feels overwhelming." Beezy nodded, her expression understanding. "I get that," she said, "but think about it this way. If you tell your story, you could help so many people. People who feel alone just like you did. And you wouldn't be doing it alone. You'd have Max and you'd have us." Kemi turned back to Beezy, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "What if I mess up?" she asked quietly. "What if I say the wrong thing?" "You won't," Beezy said firmly, "because your story is real, Kemi. It's not about being perfect. It's about being honest." A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Cunnell stepped in, carrying a clipboard and a small folder. "Good morning," he said, nodding at both women. He glanced at Kemi and added, "I hope we're not overwhelming you, but I wanted to talk more about the program." Kemi shifted slightly in her bed. "I'm listening," she said, her voice cautious. Cunnell sat down in the chair beside her bed. "Here's the thing," he began. "We've already started drafting plans for Max's mission. The idea is to have a team of volunteers who can check on people living alone, especially those with health conditions. We'd also offer workshops on emergency preparedness and connect people with local support groups." "That sounds amazing," Kemi said, her voice soft. "But where do I fit in?" Cunnell smiled. "You'd be the face of it," he said simply. "Your story and Max's story is what will inspire people to get involved. We'd share your journey through videos, interviews, and community events. You wouldn't have to do it all yourself, of course. We'd guide you every step of the way." Kemi hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of her blanket. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like that," she admitted. "That's okay," Cunnell said gently. "You don't have to decide right now. But think about it. This is a chance to turn something painful into something meaningful." The room fell quiet after Cunnell left, leaving Kemi alone with her thoughts. She looked down at Max, who was now napping peacefully at her feet. "What do you think, Max?" she whispered. "Do you think I can do this?" Max didn't answer, of course, but his steady presence gave her a strange sense of courage. Maybe, just maybe, she could take this step. Over the next few days, the hospital became a hive of activity as plans for Max's mission began to take shape. Nurses and doctors volunteered to help, local businesses offered support, and the story of Max's heroic actions spread even further. People from all over the community reached out, eager to get involved. Kemi watched all of this from her hospital room, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of her was proud. Proud of Max, proud of the impact their story was having. But another part of her was still scared. She had spent so long hiding from the world. Could she really open herself up like this? One evening, Beezy brought Kemi to the hospital's small meeting room, where a group of volunteers had gathered to discuss the program. The room was warm and lively, filled with the buzz of conversation and the scent of freshly brewed coffee. Max walked beside Kemi, his tail wagging as he greeted everyone. "This is Kemi," Beezy announced as they entered the room. "And this, of course, is Mac." The room erupted in applause, and Kemi felt her cheeks flush. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, but the warm smiles and kind words made her feel a little more at ease. One of the volunteers, a middle-aged woman named Auntie Ifioma, stepped forward and shook Kemi's hand. "Thank you for sharing your story," she said sincerely. "You've given people like me hope." "Hope?" Kemi repeated, surprised. "Yes," Auntie Ifioma said. "I live alone too. My children are grown and live far away, and there are days when it feels like the world has forgotten me. Hearing about you and Max reminded me that I'm not alone." Kemi's heart swelled at the woman's words. She had never thought of her story as something that could bring comfort to others, but now she began to see it in a new light. As the meeting went on, Kemi found herself speaking up more than she expected. She shared her thoughts on how to reach people in need, drawing from her own experiences of isolation. Each time she spoke, the room grew quiet, and she could see that people were listening, really listening. By the end of the meeting, Kemi felt a strange sense of fulfillment. For the first time in years, she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. That night, as Kemi lay in bed, she looked over at Max, who was curled up on the floor beside her. "You've changed everything," she said softly. "Because of you, I'm starting to believe in myself again." Max wagged his tail, thumping it against the floor. Kemi laughed quietly and reached down to stroke his fur. For the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could turn her pain into something meaningful, not just for herself but for others who needed it too. The next few weeks were a whirlwind for Kemi. After leaving the hospital, she was met with a mix of excitement and nerves. People from the community would stop her on the street to talk about Max, calling him a hero and thanking her for sharing her story. It was overwhelming, but in a way it felt good. For the first time in years, Kemi felt seen. At home, Max adjusted quickly to their new routine. He seemed to enjoy the attention as much as Kemi did, greeting visitors with his wagging tail and big, soulful eyes. Max's mission had officially launched, and Kemi had agreed to be the face of it. She had done interviews, attended meetings, and even spoken at a community event. But the biggest challenge was still ahead. A large fundraiser event where Kemi was expected to speak in front of hundreds of people. The thought made her stomach twist in knots. A few days before the event, Kemi sat on her living room floor with Max by her side. She stared at the speech she had written, the words blurring together on the page. "I don't know if I can do this, Max," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I mess up? What if I freeze in front of everyone?" Max looked up at her with those steady, comforting eyes. He gave her hand a gentle nudge with his nose, as if to say, "You can do this. I'm here." Kemi sighed, setting the paper down. "You always believe in me, don't you?" she murmured, scratching behind his ears. "Maybe it's time I start believing in myself too." The night of the fundraiser arrived, and the venue was packed. The room buzzed with energy as people mingled, chatting excitedly about Max's mission. The stage was set with a podium and a large banner that read, "Max's mission. Building connections, saving lives." Kemi stood backstage, her hands trembling as she clutched her speech. Nurse Beezy and Dr. Cunnell were there, offering words of encouragement. "You've got this, Kemi," Beezy said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Just speak from your heart. People are here because they believe in you and Mac." Cunnell nodded. "Remember, it's not about being perfect," he said. "It's about being real." Kemi took a deep breath, nodding. She looked down at Max, who was sitting calmly at her feet. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's do this." As Kemi stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. Hundreds of eyes were on her, and for a moment, she felt like she couldn't breathe. But then she glanced down at Max, who was sitting proudly by her side, and the fear melted away. "Good evening," Kemi began, her voice shaking slightly. "My name is Kemi, and this is Mac. The audience erupted into applause, and Kemi couldn't help but smile. She waited for the room to quiet before continuing. A few weeks ago, I was in a very dark place. I lived alone and I thought I was fine. But the truth is, I was lonely. I didn't even realize how much I was struggling until everything fell apart. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. That night, when I collapsed at home, I thought it was the end. But Max didn't give up on me. He ran to the hospital and brought help. He saved my life. The room was silent now, everyone hanging on her every word. Max taught me something important, Kemi said, her voice steady now. He showed me that it's okay to ask for help, that none of us are meant to go through life alone. And that's what Max's mission is all about. Making sure no one feels like they're alone. As she finished, the room erupted into applause once again. Kemi stepped back, her heart pounding. But this time it wasn't from fear. It was from pride. After the event, Kemi mingled with the crowd, receiving countless words of thanks and encouragement. People shared their own stories of loneliness and isolation. And for the first time, Kemi realized just how much her story had resonated. "You were amazing up there," Beezy said, giving her a hug. "I knew you could do it." Connell smiled, nodding in agreement. "You've come a long way, Kemi. And this is just the beginning." As the night wound down, Kemi stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The air was cool and crisp, and the stars sparkled overhead. Max stood beside her, his tail wagging softly. "We did it, Max," Kemi said, her voice filled with emotion. "We really did it." Max barked once, as if to say, "I never doubted you." But as Kemi looked out at the city lights, a new thought crept into her mind. This was only the beginning. There was still so much work to do, so many people who needed help. And for the first time in years, Kemi felt ready to face the challenge. She turned to Max, her eyes shining with determination. "Let's keep going," she said. "For them, for us, for everyone who needs a second chance." Max barked again, and together, they walked back inside, ready to take the next step in their journey. The sun was rising over the city as Kemi stood on the small porch of her house, looking out at the quiet street. The air was crisp, and the early morning light made everything seem fresh and full of promise. Beside her, Max stretched lazily, yawning as if he were preparing for another big day. "Big day ahead, Max," Kemi said, crouching down to pat his head. "Are you ready for it?" Max wagged his tail, his eyes sparkling with the same excitement that Kemi was starting to feel. Today was the launch of Max's mission's first official adoption event, a cornerstone of the program's community outreach. Kemi had helped plan it from the ground up, and she would once again be speaking in front of a crowd. But this time, the nerves weren't as overwhelming. This time, she felt ready. A few hours later, the event was in full swing at a local park. Bright banners with the words Max's mission, building connections, saving lives hung from trees, and tables were set up with information about the program. Families milled about, some with their own dogs, while volunteers handed out flyers and talked about the importance of community. Kemi arrived with Max, who immediately became the center of attention. Children ran up to pet him, giggling as he wagged his tail and licked their hands. "He's such a good boy," one little girl exclaimed, her eyes wide with delight. "He really is," Kemi said, smiling warmly. "And he's the reason we're all here today." As the event continued, Kemi mingled with the crowd, answering questions and sharing her story. Each time she spoke, she could see how much it resonated with people. Some shared their own struggles with loneliness or stories about how their pets had changed their lives. It was humbling, but also deeply inspiring. But the highlight of the event was still to come. A stage had been set up for Kemi's speech, and a local animal shelter had brought several dogs in need of adoption. The hope was that sharing Max's story would inspire people to open their homes to these animals. As the time for her speech approached, Kemi found herself backstage again, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. Max sat calmly beside her, his steady presence giving her the courage she needed. "You've been with me through everything," Kemi said softly, scratching behind his ears. "I wouldn't be here without you." Max wagged his tail, his eyes filled with that same unspoken understanding he always seemed to have. When Kemi stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted into applause. She waved shyly, then took a deep breath before speaking into the microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice steady. "Thank you so much for being here today. This event is about more than just finding homes for these wonderful dogs. It's about building connections, not just with our pets, but with each other." She paused, glancing down at Max, who sat proudly by her side. "A few months ago, I was living in isolation. I thought I was fine, but when I collapsed at home, it was Max who saved me. He ran to the hospital, barking until someone followed him. He didn't give up on me, and because of him, I'm standing here today." The crowd was silent, hanging on her every word. "Max taught me that we're never truly alone," Kemi continued. "And that's what Max's mission is all about. Making sure no one feels forgotten, no one feels invisible. It's about creating a community where we look out for each other." Her voice grew stronger as she added, "So today, I challenge each of you to take that first step. Whether it's adopting a pet, volunteering your time, or simply checking in on someone who might need a friend. Let's make a difference together." The audience erupted into applause as Kemi stepped back, her heart pounding. She looked down at Max, who wagged his tail and barked once, as if to say, "You did it." The rest of the event was a blur of activity. Several dogs were adopted that day, each one finding a new home and a new chance at life. Kemi couldn't help but feel a surge of pride as she watched families walk away with their new furry companions. But just as the event was winding down, something unexpected happened. A man approached Kemi, holding a small, scruffy puppy in his arms. His face was lined with worry, and his clothes were worn and slightly dirty. "Excuse me," he said hesitantly. "Are you the one who started Max's mission?" "Yes," Kemi said, her voice kind. "Can I help you?" The man nodded, his grip tightening on the puppy. "I found this little guy in an alley a few days ago," he said. "He was starving and scared. I've been feeding him, but I can't keep him. I don't have the means. I heard about this event and thought maybe you could help." Kemi looked at the puppy, her heart aching at the sight of its thin frame and frightened eyes. She reached out gently, and the puppy sniffed her hand before licking it. "We'll take care of him," Kemi said firmly. "Thank you for bringing him here." The man's eyes filled with relief. "Thank you," he said softly. "You're doing something really good here." As the man walked away, Kemi held the puppy close, feeling its tiny body tremble against her. She looked down at Max, who seemed to sense the puppy's fear. He wagged his tail and nudged the little one gently, as if to say, "You're safe now." Kemi smiled, her heart full. "Welcome to the family," she whispered to the puppy. That evening, as Kemi sat on her porch with Max and the new puppy, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The journey had been hard, and there was still so much work to do. But for the first time, she felt truly connected to Max, to her community, and to herself. "This is just the beginning, Max," she said softly, looking out at the stars. "We've got so much more to do." Max barked once, and the puppy let out a tiny yip, as if they both agreed. And as the night settled around them, Kemi knew one thing for sure. They were ready for whatever came next. The end, or maybe just the start of something even bigger. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe. Here is another interesting story to watch. Click to watch now.